Hey guys, Legendaray here and welcome back to another Clash Royale video. Now taking a look at the challenges tab, the second global tournament of season 21 is going to be starting in just a couple of hours. And this time it's going to be a double elixir global tournament. So as with every single global tournament, I'm going to be going over the top 5 decks that I would personally recommend that you guys play. Of course, there haven't been too many double elixir specific events. However, that being said, a lot of your normal 1v1 match is actually going to be spent in double elixir mode. So in that sense, it's going to be a little bit similar to just a normal 1v1 match, but just slightly more fast paced. So I've gone ahead and done my research and picked together 5 decks that have done consistently well in some previous double elixir game modes, as well as in just normal 1v1, whose playstyle really benefits from that double elixir portion of the match. Of course, with each of these decks, I'm going to be leaving a deck link down in the description, and in the video, I'm going to be going over a quick synopsis of the synergies and strategies that are involved in playing the deck effectively. Of course, before we get into the decks, if you could please leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Also, if you'd like to support me, feel free to use code RAY in the Clash Royale shop. Any support would be greatly appreciated. And with all that out of the way, let's get right into the decks. Number 1, Golem Beatdown. Now, of course, when it comes to game modes with increased amount of elixir, the very obvious choice is any type of beatdown deck, because these are more gung-ho type decks that really do benefit from the extra elixir throughout the entire match. So, starting off the match, because you are in a double elixir setting, you're able to start the match playing a little bit more aggressively, since you will have a lot more elixir to be able to defend any push that your opponents may plop down in the opposite lane. However, I would still recommend that you play the matchup a little bit more reactively. I wouldn't really cycle too many of these cards aside from a bar barrel or a mega minion, and what I'm really focusing on is trying to defend what my opponents play and then turn that into a counter push in order to take down the opponent's tower. That being said, if the opponent does make a relatively large elixir commitment, it may also be smart to just straight up play a golem in that same lane or in the opposite lane even, to try and begin building up the beatdown push as soon as possible. On the offensive end, every single one of these cards in the deck can be used to support the golem, which is going to be very useful, but the one thing that you have to watch out for is spell value. You really want to make sure that your opponent's spells or splash units do not get a ton of value if you're careless enough to actually group all of those units together. So when you're supporting a golem push, it's very important that you sometimes actually hold back, wait for your opponents to use their spells and use their splash units before you actually commit with the rest of the push. Last but not least, the tornado is an essential card in this deck. Not only does it synergize with the golem itself by pulling units into the golem, but it also synergizes very well with both of the dragons in this game. A lot of units in this golem beatdown deck are very weak to high damage output ranged units, so by using the tornado, you're able to completely nullify the effect of the opponent's defense, giving them an even tougher time. On the defensive end, cannon cart and lumberjack are going to be your main tanks, as well as high damage output, and of course the baby dragon and the electro dragon are there for some splash control as well as air damage as well. All in all, just play this like a classic beatdown deck. Just keep in mind that since you are in double elixir, you can afford to be a little bit more aggressive and keeping up some moderate pressure with the golem. Number 2, Giant Skeleton Clone. Now, this is a deck that I find is definitely one of the funnest to play, and it's also very effective if you know how to time your offensive pushes as well as those clone spells. Starting off, because this is a somewhat cheaper deck considering that it is double elixir, I'm usually totally okay with just cycling something to start off the match and then continuing to play very reactively until you can figure out an ideal moment to go in with a push. Now, the surprising thing about this Giant Skeleton Clone deck is that in addition to being a spam deck, there's also an element of beatdown to it as well, because oftentimes I'll find that I'm really focusing on building up these big pushes with the giant skeleton, the flying machine, and the cannon cart, and then at the opportune moment going in with the clone spell and just absolutely running over my opponents. In addition, on offense, the arrows are very useful in taking down low HP defenses such as archers, while also dealing a medium amount of damage to medium health defenses such as the musketeer and the magic archer. The skeleton barrel serves as your main quote-unquote win condition, and it's a very great card that applies quick pressure that your opponent has has to immediately respond to, or else they're either going to take skeleton barrel death damage or they're going to take a ton of damage from those skeletons. Last but not least, it's so important that you time your clones effectively and make sure that the opponent does not have adequate splash answers such as the NATO or the Ice Wizard or the Baby Dragon in cycle when you go in with that clone. On the defensive end, Cannon Cart and Hunter are going to be your two main tank damage outputs. Giant Skeleton always serves as an absolutely amazing lane clogger, and the Barbarians are an extremely underrated card in this meta because there actually is a little bit of Fireball Bait synergy in this deck between the Barbarians, the Hunter, and the Flying Machine. All in all, it's a very well-rounded deck, so it's definitely one of my top picks for this upcoming global tournament. Number 3, Royal Hogs Fireball Bait. Now this is a deck that absolutely dominates in a normal 1v1 match, and I think this very well translates to a double elixir situation because a lot of the cards in this deck are medium to high cost, meaning that it absolutely does amazing in double elixir time. Now this Royal Hogs Fireball Bait deck has two main points. The first is obviously the Fireball Bait element. Because there are so many medium health units in this deck, it's very important to not give your opponent that much spell value and instead use some of these medium health units as a way of baiting out the opponent's medium spells. This will obviously free you up to use anything else in this deck because pretty much every single unit in this deck is a Fireball Bait element. Now when it comes to how to actually play this deck, it's a very double lane heavy type deck. So you're always going to be either cycling a Goblin Cage in the center, which allows you to build up some additional elixir, or you're going to be cycling your Royal Recruits in the back of the arena, constantly trying to build up these double lane Royal Recruit pushes with the Hogs, with the Zappies, with the Flying Machine that will eventually completely overwhelm your opponents. The amount of units that you can build up with this deck is absolutely insane, and oftentimes, even if you can't break through in an initial push, the opponents are going to have to spend so much elixir perfectly defending these pushes that by the time they finish defending the first push, you already have a second one beginning to build up in the back. In addition, because there are just so many units in this deck, it is very difficult for the opponent to perfectly stop these pushes, so more often than not, for every single push you get in, you're going to guarantee a couple hundred damage on the opponent's crown tower. That being said, of course, with any deck, you're going to have to pull your weight on defense, and this deck will definitely deliver. The Goblin Cage is absolutely amazing for pulling tanks. The Royal Recruits are kind of your catch-all for almost any type of defense. The sheer amount of units will allow it to very easily defend almost any kind of push, and the Zappies are also great for not only resetting those charging units, but also just stalling the opponent's push out, allowing the tower and the Royal Recruits to get even more damage on the opponent's pushes. All in all, definitely another really solid deck that just absolutely excels at completely shutting down the opponent and overwhelming them with the sheer number of units. Number 4, Electro Giant Beatdown. Now, note that there is a Cannon Cart in this deck. The more popular variation of this deck has the Dark Prince in for it, so depending on what you want to play, use either the Cannon Cart or the Dark Prince in that card slot. Now, the way you play this deck is more of a controlled type beatdown deck. So starting off, you're going to be a little bit more passive with the Goblin Cage and more reacting to what your opponents play. But once you start getting into a rhythm, you're going to really want to start building up these Electro Giant pushes over and over again to eventually try and break into the opponent's tower. Now, as usual, there are definitely a couple ways for you to approach this offense. The first is like a classic big Golem Beatdown push. Of course, the Electro Giant is an 8 elixir card, so you of course just play the Electro Giant in the back, support it with a Baby Dragon, the Ice Wizard, the Cannon Cart, and you just try and brute force your way breaking through to the opponent's tower. The second way is to actually utilize that Electro Giant's zapping ability, and by that I mean is your goal is to simply get the Electro Giant to the tower by all means necessary. because every single time the tower will attack the Electro Giant, it's going to zap the tower and deal so much damage. You can see in this replay, I'm getting so many Electro Giant locks over and over again, and every single time it just guarantees several hundred damage onto the opponent's tower. In order to get these connections, you're going to have to utilize your spells very effectively. The lightning is great to take down any sort of medium health ranged units, as well as buildings such as the Inferno Tower or the Tesla, and the tornado is great at nullifying the advantage of any sort of ranged unit. Pulling them into the Electro Giant will cause the Electro Giants to zap those units out, and it will also group those units up for any support you might have, such as the Baby Dragon or the Ice Wizard. On defense, of course, this deck is super solid. This is the definition of a control deck. The Ice Wizard, the Baby Dragon, the Tornado, and the Goblin Cage are 4 cards that are almost completely rock solid on defense, being able to take down big beatdown pushes to any sort of swarm push very easily. In addition, the Cannon Cart and the Bar Barrel are 2 insanely useful units, and even the Electro Giant can occasionally be used on defense as well, providing a great way for you to begin building up a counter push while also playing defense. All in all, again, it's a very control type deck, but in this double elixir mode, you will be playing it more like a quick cycle beatdown. Number 5, Heka Ram Rider. This is more of a P.E.K.K.A. bridge spam control type deck. You're going to be applying high pressure throughout the entire match. There are definitely a lot of ways for you to do so. Sometimes you can just go in with a bandit at the bridge or a bar barrel at the bridge, or other times you're going to be building up pushes from the back with the P.E.K.K.A. and the Ram Rider. This is what makes this deck so versatile. There's not only ways for you to apply cheap, quick pressure, but there's also ways for you to build up heavy, massive pushes to overwhelm your opponents. On offense, you can utilize this very effectively by combining the two, and sometimes using a big push, or other times going with quick pressure at the bridge. The lightning is a spell that I will use mostly for those big beatdown pushes, and of course the snowball and the Baby Dragon form a great support for any type of swarm that the opponent may have to counter your pushes. Now, while this deck is very aggressive and you're going to be mostly focusing on playing offense, there are definitely very solid defensive options as well for this deck. Of course, P.E.K.K.A. is there to take down any sort of tank unit, as well as provide tankage for your other defensive units. Ewiz and the Baby Dragon are great for splash control, as well as to reset the opponent's charging units, and the Ram Rider is actually an extremely underrated defensive card because its snare is able to slow units down so much that your other defensive troops will just have almost infinite time to damage that push down. Finally, the bandit also serves as a pretty important role. If you know how to play her properly, you'll be able to tank an entire Sparky shot or an entire Prince hit with just a simple 3 elixir card. So all in all, very well-rounded deck, and it's definitely one that sort of plays the role of trying to counter the meta in this double elixir tournament. So there we go. Those are the top 5 decks that I would recommend you guys run in this upcoming Double Elixir Global Tournament. I'm really enjoying these 2 global tournaments per season. I really do think it was a great idea for there to be one normal 1v1 global tournament and another slightly different one that involves a much more different game mode. Again, all of the decks that I've shared today will have deck links down in the description, so be sure to check them out if you are interested. But unfortunately, guys, that's all I've got time for in today's episode. Huge thanks to all of my channel members. You guys are the absolute G's. If you enjoyed, please leave a like down below, as well as a subscription to my channel. And as always, this is Legendaray, and I'm signing off. See you guys next time.